There's a new blueprint for the future city of Detroit, and with it, $150 million from the Kresge Foundation to begin implementation. What are the implications of the plan, and is it a realistic goal for the city? It's all coming up on American Black Journal.
Lindsay wants to know.
So I'm curious, what's DTE Energy doing to improve their customer service?
Why don't we take a ride over there and let Rachel tell us? Hello.
Hello. Take a walk with me. Here at DTE Energy, we're working very hard to improve our service, like answering every call under 1 minute and resolving the issue on the first call.
Wow, no passing the buck, huh?
Nope. And plus, we're adding over 100 customer service jobs right here in the state of Michigan.
I need to get a real job.
I'm going to send your application.
Thanks, Rachel. DTE Energy. Know your own power.
Welcome to American Black Journal. I'm Stephen Henderson. After nearly 2 years of surveying and mapping, the Detroit Works Project Long-Term Planning unveiled an incredibly ambitious plan to redevelop the city in new ways. Business leaders, citizens, community groups, and philanthropists all contributed ideas and funding to this long-term plan. So joining me today are two people who have been a key part of the Detroit Works since the beginning. Alice Thompson, who's the CEO of Black Family Development and a member of the Detroit Works Steering Committee, and Dan Kinkead from Hamilton Anderson and the Detroit Works Long-Term Technical Team. Welcome to American Black Journal.
Thank you.
So this was a very big week, I think, in Detroit. I've never seen anything quite like this plan, which is humongous and incredibly detailed. It's not, I have to say, it's not what I expected. I thought the plan wouldn't have this kind of incredible detail, and it really is a blueprint for the future of the city. Talk about where we go from here, though. Like, we've got this now. What does this now mean for people who live here?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, ideally what we've made is not necessarily a master plan, the conventional document that folks are used to. We've really created a framework, and it's a framework for decision making. It happens to be incredibly comprehensive in nature, as you've noted.
Yeah.
It covers things like economic growth, land use, our neighborhoods, city systems, how we use our public land and building assets, and it actually brings them all back together and integrates them in a way that can then facilitate better, more strategic decision making in the long run, because we realize we're at a point where for a very long time, folks within the city have done for themselves what others maybe could not do, right?
Right.
But we don't really have the opportunity to perhaps not use resources as well as we could. This is about using those resources as best as we can, being as strategic as possible to make sure we can move the entire city forward.
Right, right. And Alice, at Black Family Development, and you were a member of the Detroit Works team. It seems to me that one of the genius parts of this plan is that it did include groups like yours, neighborhood groups, and ordinary citizens in the way that it was put together.
Absolutely. And I'm going to say of my experience being involved in lots of initiatives going back to the 70s and calling this the Renaissance City, I have not seen anything that has been as broad, deep, and comprehensive that really focused on civic and community engagement. There was a real push from day one that this is not going to work unless we have the engagement of every citizen who is interested in this city.
Right.
And that was a continuous push. And we kept moving until we got it right. And so the number of residents who came out to small meetings and large meetings and gave their voice and input was simply phenomenal.
Right, right. And so what's your sense of what their reaction would be to this plan? I mean, that's always the fear in Detroit, is that you come out with a plan like this and the first instinct for a lot of people is to say, this is something that outsiders are trying to do to us, not something that we're supposed to do for ourselves.
But I think Detroiters are going to see their footprint in this plan, this framework, because they helped design it. And when you read it, the language is so respectful of the input of the average ordinary person.
Right.
And so for those who came to the table, they were serious about being heard, and they were heard.
Right.
And so as you read the plan, you're going to see Detroiters in this plan. You're going to see a mixture of our planning experts working with local residents about what we wanted to see in this city. You cannot do a plan that's successful without Detroiters blessing it. And so their input is going to be seen, I believe, in these pages.
Right. Dan, in terms of implementation of this, we've got Kresge saying, here's $150 million at least to get started, but I imagine that's sort of a drop in the bucket, really. And when you think about all of the ideas that are in here, what do we need to make this more than just a plan and something that Detroiters sort of live with?
Yeah, right. Well, I think we need a few things. The first is to realize that now is the time for action, right? Now is the time to move forward with some serious steps. It is a long-term planning effort, right? And so it looks out over a series of time horizons, the ability to stabilize the city tomorrow, to improve it substantially over perhaps the next 20 years, and then really transform it over the long haul, but with good resources in place like those that Kresge's offered up. And really it's a demonstration of their commitment to this project and the fact that those resources are going to be deployed through the framework itself, right? To make sure that they're so strategically used. I think it's even better. And so what folks can, investors, business leaders, neighborhood groups, everybody can have confidence that those resources are going to be in place, and they can actually build on that. And it starts in small ways with small scale pilot projects. It starts in maybe larger ways with things that are already starting within the city, within the Detroit Water and Sewage Department and SEMCOG. There's already a green infrastructure project that's going to be coming out. That aligns directly with what we're trying to accomplish here.
Alice, I think when I think about the city and I think about neighborhoods, I tend to think about the neighborhoods that we don't talk about. When we talk about neighborhoods in the city, we tend to talk about the neighborhoods that are stable, places like Palmer Woods and Indian Village, or places that are really, really distressed, where you have one or two houses on a block. But it seems to me that most of the city is somewhere in between those two, and citizens there are really feeling the decline. I mean, that's where the critical sort of decline is taking place. What's your sense of what this plan means to those people?
Well, those individuals were involved in the process. We specifically reached out to those particular neighborhoods, and what we found was phenomenal hope and optimism about their city, and tremendous love for their neighborhood in spite of the decline. And so what you have is small groups like block clubs in some neighborhoods, neighborhood associations who came to the table, and they have plans on the table for their particular community right now. What this will do for them is help them bring that to scale. We can really begin to take our investments and be very strategic about helping those neighborhoods. But neighborhood residents, and I'm going to say block club leaders, were very much engaged in the process. And so again, this plan does not start from new. We're building upon what people are already trying to do and can bring it to scale.
Right.
So the residents see really hope for their neighborhoods. And I'll give a really small story about my block.
Sure. Where do you live?
In West Detroit.
Okay. Okay.
And on my block 2 years ago, I looked around and there were 5 vacant houses, either through foreclosure or some other kind of reason.
Just on your block?
On my block alone, right? And it was a wonderful, beautiful, robust Northwest block, right? But do you know, over this period of time, I have seen people come back into those homes. The last home that was still vacant, I saw a porch light go on Monday night, and I was so happy, right? And so there is people who are saying this city is worth staying in, it's worth investing in, and so there is an air of hope and optimism, however small it may be right now, but it's important for this work going forward.
Right. Right. One of the most knowledgeable reporters on the Detroit Works project and how the city of Detroit could be reimagined is my colleague from the Free Press and the author of Reimagining Detroit, John Gallagher. He joins us now from his home in Detroit. Welcome, John, to ABJ.
Thanks, Stephen. How you doing?
Good. John, I know that you have spent more time than almost anyone I know thinking and writing about what is going on in the city now and what should be going on to sort of make things better. I'm really curious, now that you've seen this Detroit Works report, how similar is what's in this report to what you found in your research?
Well, I think this is the compilation of all the latest sort of cutting edge thinking and strategies about what to do with post-industrial cities. So I think this is, as you said, Stephen, is the most comprehensive and innovative collection of ideas that we have for an American city. This goes, for example, far beyond what Youngstown, Ohio did in their Youngstown 2010 plan. And I think the notions about concentrating resources in the key areas to densify, I think that's really important. I think some of the blue and green infrastructure things that they want to do with landscape is very important. So I think this report is really right on where we need to go. I think the question, of course, is is what happens from this point on.
Right. John, you have lived here a long time and seen plans come and go. You know, when they built the Renaissance Center in the 70s, I remember I was a kid then, that was supposed to be the turnaround point for Detroit. Is this different? And if so, why do you think it is?
Well, it's quite different. The Renaissance Center was one of those big showcase projects, a castle on the riverfront that had zero chance of turning around Detroit's problems. And we're getting more realistic. We understand that 60 years of suburban sprawl is not going to reverse itself. The population and the tax base has mostly moved to the suburbs, and that's not going to reverse. So what we're saying is, what can we make of our city now? What can we do with a street like West McNichols, where there's some hospitals and some good employment districts? How do we beef that up with enhanced transit options, for example? How do we get Detroit residents to the jobs that exist? What does our transit system have to look like? What does a landscape have to look like if there's zero chance of ever getting the homes and the shops back into some of these neighborhoods? So I think the plan is much more realistic and probably gives you a framework of where we ought to be going.
I know, John, that you've looked at lots of other cities in terms of how they've managed this kind of decline. And of course, in Detroit, it's always been more acute than in most other places. Are there things that you're seeing in this plan that remind you of things that people have tried other places, and have they been successful in those places?
Yeah, well, the big idea is concentration of resources. So that if you go to Pittsburgh or some of those cities, Philadelphia, you see neighborhoods that have really become successful because all kinds of people and organizations have poured resources into the area. You have to get to a certain tipping point. It's been noticed that if you build scattered site housing in a distressed neighborhood, say 10 new homes or 20 new homes, it really doesn't do much good. You really have to pour in a lot of resources, and you have to start with a place that's got some vitality to begin with. So as you said, it's those neighborhoods in the middle. It's not the most distressed neighborhoods, but it's the neighborhoods in the middle or that are doing, relatively well, that need greater concentration of resources. And I think that's something that you're seeing in a lot of other cities that have turned around certain neighborhoods.
If you were in charge of implementing this, John, what would be your first big move? What would be the way that you would get people in Detroit to buy into it, number one, but number two, to see that it's actually going to make a difference in their neighborhoods?
Well, the obstacle here is not the money, because we do come up with money to do stuff we want to do. We built casinos and the Riverwalk and all that stuff. And it's not the politicians, because they'll line up behind a successful plan. I think it's the bureaucratic inertia. This plan requires us to rewrite the Detroit zoning code in significant ways.
Right.
It requires us to have agencies as diverse as water and sewer and Detroit Public Schools working together. And that's very hard to do. The City Planning Commission just adopted a new urban agriculture ordinance. It took them 4 years to do it, and it mostly recognizes the existence of community gardens that are already operating in the city. So that's a fairly minor thing that took 4 years. So I think rewriting the total zoning code to encompass all these innovative ideas is a big challenge. And I think it's that sort of thing is going to be the problem, getting sort of moving the bureaucracy.
Moving city government to make it actually work.
Right.
One last question for you, John. I'm really curious about the idea of moving people. We've been talking about that for a couple years in Detroit, ever since Detroit Works started. This plan doesn't really say that people will have to move, but I think if you read through it, it's pretty clear that there will be some deprioritization of certain areas, and people will be encouraged to move. How realistic is that in a city like Detroit?
Not very. Relocating residents voluntarily through incentives has not really worked very well anywhere. They tried it in a minor degree in Youngstown, Ohio, and almost nobody bit. So I think we're not going to be moving people out. We have to understand that we can sort of work around some of the remaining occupants, residents, buildings, commercial activity in some of the most distressed neighborhoods. That's the only way you got to work to understand it's going to be a very complex urban landscape with some residences, some old-time businesses, and then a lot of new stuff happening around them. I think that's the only way that we're going to do this, to accept it's going to be a very complex environment.
So then what happens, though, to people who are still in those areas? that are mostly depopulated. I mean, we have that happening now. You know, the Near East side of the city, I think, is a great example where you really only have a couple houses per block. You anticipate that will continue, but that what's around them will change?
Yeah, I think so. I think, well, if the plan is carried out, then you'll see some of the vacant lots become orchards, farms, blue infrastructure, retention ponds for rainwater. And that will happen in and around some of these neighborhoods. Now, I think they'll probably, to make it go down easier, they'll probably pick the most abandoned areas to start, where there's going to be less pushback. Any place you're going to have a lot of pushback because there's still a lot of residents there, you're not going to see that much happening. We may clean up some vacant lots, but for example, if there's a street with half the homes left, I don't think you'll see, say, a farm on the other half. I think you'll see the farms and the orchards and that sort of stuff on the blocks where there's maybe one home left per block.
Okay. Thank you very much for joining us, John.
Thank you.
I want to turn back to you guys and talk some more specifically about some of the things that jumped out at me in the plan. I think it's full of this sort of wonderful, like I said, detail. And there's a phrase that I wanted to start us off with that is in I think the first section that talks about the economy. It says, Detroit is not too big, its economy is too small. I thought that was such a wonderful way to talk about it, not just, and I think that's true not just in terms of business, that's true in terms of residents, that's true. I mean, it's a really global statement about what our problem is.
Yeah, absolutely, and there are real issues on the ground in Detroit, and there are things that we absolutely need to deal with, and that's what this is working toward. But fundamentally, it's about really transforming that perception too. Yes, we've got a lot of land. We've got a lot of available vacant land. And oftentimes that vacant land is really categorized as a tremendous liability.
Right.
What we're trying to do here is say, actually, that can be an incredible asset.
You have to turn it into an asset, but it can be, right?
Absolutely. So in this case, Detroit has the opportunity to move from being considered, in many cases from an urban perspective, a kind of retrograde model, into being a new model, an innovative model that can lead other cities. This is our chance to lead others, to show how you can use your land to develop greater employment. You can actually use it to institute green and blue infrastructure systems that actually help us clean our air and clean our water and do a whole host of things that other folks can't do. It can also help us develop more innovative urban models of neighborhoods too.
Right. And that phrase kicks off a chapter that talks about these different employment districts in the city. Talk some about how that's supposed to work and what that really means.
Sure. Well, what we've done is we've taken a very evidence-based but also place-based approach to the economic growth here. Oftentimes when economic growth is talked about at a number of different levels, it tends to float above. We really know that we need to land it on the ground, and it's something we actually heard time and again from residents. During the
community meetings.
Absolutely. And so we took that to heart, and we recognize that, look, most times the employment conversation within the city of Detroit begins and ends with greater downtown in a lot of ways, right? But that we know that is very important. We need to build on what's there, but we need to actually expand beyond it. And so what we've done is we've included overall 7 employment districts. These are areas that we think can be strategically coordinated for greater resources, greater deployment of investment, but also more guidelines for regulatory reform that can help things in these areas.
Help grow jobs.
Absolutely, and it begins to actually build on the employment opportunities that are already there, which demonstrates a diverse array of different industries, from digital and creative downtown to eds and meds in Midtown, to potentially an eds and meds emerging corridor along McNichols.
West McNichols.
As John had noted, you've got University of Detroit Mercy, you've got Marygrove, you've got Sinai Grace, you've got WC3. The bones are there. Let's build on it. And then lastly, the fact that Detroit has been an industrial city, it is an industrial city, and it will be an industrial city. And those industrial jobs demonstrate the skilled labor that we have within the city and provide an opportunity for employment for a wider array of Detroiters. Because today, for the folks within the city of Detroit who are employed, who are part of the active labor force, and by the way, the majority of folks 25 to 64 within the city of Detroit are not part of the active labor force.
Sure.
For those few people within the city who are working, the majority of them work outside the city, as Alice had mentioned earlier, and in a city where you really don't have a good public transportation system, or at least one that struggles to serve such diminished density, you really have limited means to get out to those jobs, especially when a fifth of the population doesn't have a private vehicle. So we need to bring the jobs back into Detroit. We need to center them in these districts. We need to concentrate resources there too.
Yeah, Alice, jobs for Detroiters, that's gotta, I mean, that's just gotta be music to your ears and all the people in your organization.
And it has been to many of the residents too, but there is a growing, really expanding entrepreneur sector in this city.
Sure, yeah.
And so you have in neighborhoods where neighborhood residents are learning how to be their own entrepreneurs and create money within their own neighborhoods flowing by helping each other. That's increasing in our city,
Right.
and that's a really important piece. And I do want to say this about the quote about our size. We looked around the country at various cities, and so for our land size and our land mass and our population, it's like Atlanta. Atlanta's flourishing, right?
Yeah.
But how we think about our city and how we perceive is very important. That language is helping to reshape our thinking about our city.
Right.
Declining population is not a doom for a city.
Right,
It's
right.
how you then begin to use the land that you have based upon that population. So the notion about aligning our assets, you know, with opportunity and innovation are key things for us right now. This city's size is fine. We need a bigger, robust
You got to make
economy.
better use of it.
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah.
Exactly.
And Atlanta's a great example. I mean, Atlanta's a very large city and not very dense in terms of you know, in terms of its population.
Yes.
But it's the population that it has. It's retained far more of its middle class
Yes.
than Detroit has. And in fact, there are wealthy, very wealthy neighborhoods inside the city of Atlanta that help shore up that tax base, and then you've got a lot of working class neighborhoods where people have jobs.
And I would add one thing to that too, that if you look at cities like Atlanta or Denver or Portland, these are places that can be considered peer cities in many ways to Detroit. And often in the dialogue in Detroit, we talk about those areas of high vacancy or low density.
Right.
But in fact, we think in some cases, the more important end of the equation are the higher density areas. And quite honestly, when Detroit compares with those other places, we have a much smaller percentage of our total land area that is actually high density, even though we have greater population. That's one of the critical problems for Detroit. We have to actually build on those areas of higher density, and it begins to actually buoy the entire city.
Right. When you say that, though, a lot of people hear you're going to pay attention to wealthier neighborhoods at the expense of the more struggling areas. How do you fight that perception?
That's not the case. It is not the case. If anything is true about this project, it's that fundamentally this is about the city as a whole. Right. Overall, this is an effort to bring the entire city forward, and higher density does not mean higher income.
Right.
There are a lot of high density areas that aren't, and this fundamentally is an equitable strategy. It has to be an equitable strategy to move the city forward.
Right. When I think of high density and not necessarily wealthy, the first place that comes to my mind is Southwest. I mean, that's an area that is probably the most dense in Detroit. It's not, I mean, there are some middle class areas of it, but it's not what you would think of when you think of Palmer Woods or Indian Village. I would imagine that's a place that's going to get a lot of attention under this plan.
There are many places that will get attention, but I'm going to say this. Those challenge areas have had the most robust involvement in this process.
Is that right?
They're the ones who've come to the table. They're the ones who are solely invested in this. And so in terms of how we begin, we're going to spread throughout the city, not just look at one area. And so there are a number of areas that we're going to look at the same time, and these areas that have things going on right now, we're going to build up on that. But not just one area. But I have to lift up that people who live in those most challenged communities have come to the table most frequently to be involved in the process.
Yeah, right. Well, they have the most at stake in
Absolutely.
a lot of ways.
Yes.
We have about 2 minutes left. I want to talk about the leveraging of public assets. We fight a lot in Detroit about those assets, things like the water department, our parks. A lot of people think that maybe we aren't in a position to be able to maintain those just as solely public assets. But in the report, I think you guys really took a look at what could be done with to leverage those for economic growth, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you look at the water system overall, I mean, it's an incredible system, right? One of the largest in the world overall, but unfortunately, it's only operating about 40% of its overall
capacity. Sure.
So, and without the revenues to come in to actually support it. So this is about growth to get there. It doesn't have to be growth just through population, though. Industrial development, commercial development, that actually does a whole lot more to
That'll
get
suck
there.
up some of that, yeah.
Right, and so that's a big bit of infrastructure that we can build on that a lot of other cities don't have. Secondly, if you begin to look at our public land portfolio, right, many people look at this again as another indicator of a liability, right? We got all this vacant land and the public entities own it all, and boy, this is not good. But at the end of the day, that really does give the city and other folks a strategic advantage to take land, to reassemble it, and actually to utilize it for different means. We have to recognize, though, within the city of Detroit today, we do have an anemic economy.
Right.
And we do, you know, we need to think more innovatively about how we use that land.
Yeah. We're out of time. Great to have you guys here. Wonderful work on the report. And as a Detroiter, I got to say, I'm really looking forward to seeing it unfold.
As a Detroiter, too, I agree.
That's right. It's good news for all of us.
Yeah.
I want to say thanks to my guests and thanks to you for joining us. We'd love to hear what's on your mind, so connect with us on Facebook and continue the conversation. I also want to take a moment to note a change here at ABJ. Jamie K. Walters, who has produced this show since I began hosting it 3 years ago, is moving on to a fabulous new opportunity at another station. Jamie's influence on the show and on me has been nothing short of foundational. She's the colleague I work most with on the show's look, feel, and content. And every week when I get here and sit in this chair, it's her tireless work that makes mine possible. We'll miss her and we wish her well. We'll see you next time on American Black Journal.
Lindsay wants to know,
So I'm curious, what's DTE Energy doing to improve their customer service?
why don't we take a ride over there and let Rachel tell us? Hello.
Hello, take a walk with me. Here at DC Energy, we're working very hard to improve our service, like answering every call under 1 minute and resolving the issue on the first call.
Wow, no passing the buck, huh?
Nope. And plus, we're adding over 100 customer service jobs right here in the state of Michigan.
I need to get a real job.
I'm going to send your application.
Thanks, Rachel. DTE Energy. Know your own power.